this webinar series, Setting the Stage for Building with Nature. My name is Fokko van Goot. I'm Program Manager at EcoShape, and I'm hosting this webinar together with my co-host Lies. Thank you very much for joining in such a great audience. We have many people sitting at home watching this webinar live. Before we start, I would like to explain the house rules of this webinar. As you've noticed, the sound of your microphone has been switched automatically. We try to stay in time. The webinar is set for 1 hour, and we will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, for which you can submit your questions during the webinar. There's a question and answer icon on your GoToMeeting screen. We will be able to see all the questions. You will not be able to see all the questions that are coming in, but we will remind you during the course of this webinar to submit your questions. If you want to go live into the webinar during the Q&A session, please add OK to your question, and we will try to make a live connection at the end of this series. We have a few videos that will pop up during the course of this webinar. Please notice that not all video screens will pop up automatically. If this is the case, there's a window button that you can click on where this and subsequently the video will be pop up on your screen. So please note that when the videos start. So where are we? This is the second webinar in the series Upscaling Building with Nature together. The first series was 2 weeks ago, which I also hosted together with Lies. That was about capacity building. And this series is about institutional embedding. The focus of this webinar series is what are the key factors that are needed for upscaling building with nature. And these two, the first two parts are focusing on setting the stage for building with nature. So I've mentioned EcoShape a few times. What is EcoShape? EcoShape is a public-private consortium of about 15 organizations, mainly from the Dutch water engineering sector, and engineering consultants, knowledge institutes, contractors, NGOs, and we work together with governmental organizations. It's a public-private organization with the aim to develop fundamental and applied knowledge about how to apply building with nature in practice. We do this already for 12 years with a bottom-up approach, so construction of pilot projects with innovative solutions and building with nature concepts, with the aim to distribute the knowledge, make it publicly available, so others can use this knowledge to apply building with nature in other landscapes and other situations. During the past 12 years, we have created a lot of knowledge that we now have combined in this beautiful book, Building with Nature, Creating, Implementing, and Upscaling Nature-Based Solutions for the Water Infrastructure. It's currently being in print and will be available shortly in a bookstore and also on our website, ecoshape.org. Now we move on to the topic of this webinar, and I'll give the word to my co-host Lies.
Yes, thank you, Fokko. I first will introduce myself. My name is Lies Huitema, and I'm a program assistant at EcoShape. Well, I want to tell you that we have developed a lot of knowledge, as Fokko told you, about building with nature, how to implement it in 12 years of time. And now it's time to set, take, and share the stage for building with nature, because we need and we want to upscale nature-based solutions. Because if we include nature in our sustainable development, we can actually tackle those challenges of climate change and biodiversity loss. Well, you may question yourself, how can we do this? How can we scale up building with nature? Well, also last time we told you about our 6 enablers. Our book is also presenting these 6 enablers because with these 6 enablers, you can see them as the main ingredients to have successful building with nature projects. Well, last time we talked about capacity building, but this time we will talk about institutional embedding. You can see it also in the cardboard box that is behind me. We have all 6 enablers in our studio. Well, before we have some experts in the studio that will explain with their practical knowledge what institutional embedding is, we first want to define the concept. I will give the word back to Fokko, who is telling you more about institutional embedding.
Thank you very much. So during these past 12 years, we've learned a lot, especially about the technical and engineering and ecological aspects of building with nature concepts. However, we also realized that the more soft side of the implementing factors, the institutional embedding, capacity building, and also the financial aspects are as important as these technical aspects. So institutional embedding, what is this about? We see that building with nature solutions are different and fundamentally different than the traditional engineering solutions that we are used to. They are dynamic, they are new, they are based on the local context, and this requires a different way of collaboration, a different way of using government aspects and institutional tools to apply these building with nature concepts in practice. We know how to do this in pilots, but upscaling and make them the standard, it's a whole new thing. So that's what we would like to dive into in this webinar series. We talk about institutional embedding at a global level, international frameworks. We're going to look at the national setting of institutional embedding, and we're going to look at a practical example at local level, how these tools are being applied in practice. So for this, we have invited 3 very interesting speakers. The first one I would like to introduce is not present in the studio, but is sitting at home in Geneva. It's Nathalie Doswald. Nathalie Doswald works for the UNEP, the United Nations Environment Program. Welcome, Nathalie. Please switch on your screen and switch on your video and your screen sharing. Can you hear me, Nathalie?
Yes, good afternoon, Fokko, and thank you very much for inviting me today. I'm going to share my screen, so just let me know if you can see my PowerPoint.
Yes, we can. I will shortly introduce you.
Yes, please do.
An environmental scientist with a PhD in ecology. She currently works for the UNEP Crisis Management Branch and is promoting ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction at a global, regional, and national level. Nathalie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fokko. So, as Fokko laid out, we're talking about institutional embedding, and I will be presenting to you some thoughts around at the international level in terms of international framework agreements, and specifically I will talk to you about the Sendai framework. But before then, I'd like to let you think a little bit about 3 global agendas which were set in 2015. So we have, these 3, because of the fact that they were linked, because they were set in 2015, they are linked. So we have obviously the one which is, let's say, more overarching, which is the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We have the Paris Agreement under the UNFCCC, and we have the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, which I will be going into a little bit more. Now, nature and nature-based solutions figure in all 3 to some extent, whether implicitly or explicitly. And I mean, the reason already why they all more or less mention to some degree, of course, is the Sustainable Development Goals, and I have put up some here which I feel directly relate to nature-based solutions. So nature-based solutions, as you probably know, is an umbrella term which covers a whole host of different approaches, building with nature being one of them. So let's think a little bit more in detail about the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction and what does institutional embedding look like in this one. So the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction has 4 priority areas which governments try to think of when they're creating their national disaster risk reduction strategies. So the Sendai Framework is a global agreement. This one is non-binding, but it's a global agreement to try and help reduce disaster risk around the world and in each country. And within these, in 2015, these 4 of these priority areas, 3 of these now at least contains specific mention of ecosystems and also ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, which is a nature-based solution. And many building with nature projects can also be highlighted under the term ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction. Sorry if I'm really confusing you with all of this terminology, but let's just say that nature-based solutions, if that's the easiest term for you, figures in some form or other in 3 of these priority areas, meaning that the world has agreed upon that this is something that ought to be looked at and ought to be done. So how did we get there? Because this is part of the story of institutional embedding. Now, I'm going to present this to you in a rather linear and seems like easy way, but obviously this is much more complex in a certain sense than I'm going to present to you. Now, I could take you back all the way to the Rio Declaration, but that would be going a little bit way too far, and this is not a history lesson. I want to take you back just to the Hyogo Framework for Action, which was the predecessor to the Sendai Framework. So in this agreement, which is also about disaster risk reduction, was recognized, and this is important, was recognized that environmental degradation was an important driver of disaster risk. And it was also recognized that, therefore, that undertaking environmental or natural resource management should help reduce disaster risk. Seems hopefully obvious to you. However, it wasn't clear to many people, and it wasn't clear to also some working on the ground and also at the global level, at the national level, and maybe local level we can argue with, but it wasn't clear how to do that. I mean, one knew about environmental management, one knew about natural resource management, but there definitely was a need to improve understanding on the role of ecosystems and ecosystem management in reducing disaster risk. And this is important because otherwise, well, governments are not going to be interested in suggesting that they should do this unless we know how and why. So in order to kind of help this process, was formed in 2008 a partnership called the Partnership for Environment and Disaster Risk Reduction. So it is a global alliance of UN agencies, NGOs, and special institutes who all came around the knowledge that environment and working with the environment, or if you like, building with nature, was important in reducing disaster risks. But we had to convince, or we had to make that knowledge better known for that to be therefore taken up in the let's say the international institutional setting of the next framework agreement, which at this point would have been Sendai. So this partnership, PEDA for short, worked to increasing the science and knowledge. And as you also heard about in the last webinar, if you attended, strengthen capacities for implementation and scaling up, because this is also crucial, as you probably discovered in last webinar. And importantly, I think for today, we're also engaged in a lot of policy advocacy. So here, let me now present to you the partnership. So in 2008, there were only 9 institutions. Now we have 26 institutions who are formally part of this partnership, all working, at least some part of them, all working as a knowledge hub, as a capacity strengthener of environment and disaster risk reduction, and also climate change adaptation. So this is, I think, very crucial parts, because as you can see, you have a lot of big organizations here, coming together to show something towards governments and say, this is what we need to do. And it's worked because, or at least it worked because they helped improve the understanding of ecosystems and ecosystem management in reducing disaster risk. Don't know what happened here, I'm sorry. Introducing in disaster risk. And they use the term ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction. So bearing in mind, in 2008, nature-based solutions, the term did not exist yet, which is why we have this particular term here. And it was therefore, after showing through many documents, but also through pilot projects that this concept, this works, it was incorporated into the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. So this is one major way, although it takes a lot of efforts, and obviously it's by no means the only way that this has happened, obviously. So now that it's within the Sendai framework, does the story end here? Does institutional embedding, is it that simple? Does this mean this is great? It's now in there and everybody is doing nature-based solutions in their national strategies, disaster risk reduction strategies? Well, not entirely. I think there are two things here. First, the Sendai framework has 7 global targets. Here you can see them on the left, and you might notice that if you look down them, we have reduced mortality, reduced affected people, reduced economic loss, reduced damage to critical infrastructure, increased cooperation, but there's nothing specific on the environment. So there's nothing to report necessarily on specifically, although there is, must admit, it's not there, not there entirely. There is a footnote under one target around critical infrastructure, is that governments can report on critical green infrastructure. So it is there to some extent, but that is, I guess, is something that could be potentially improved if there, maybe in the next phase, thinking about targets and indicators around environment within the Sendai and disaster risk reduction. So that's one thing to still continue to work at, because that is still something maybe that there's not necessarily also enough knowledge on. What can we call critical infrastructure? How do you measure it, etc., etc. The second part of this question is then, okay, now that even though there may be some question around targets and indicators, it's still been shown in the Sendai that environment and ecosystem-based adaptation or nature-based solutions is important in terms of their priority areas. Does that mean it gets translated into national DRR strategies? Well, sometimes yes already, depending on what countries we may have worked with, or also who have more interest within this. But sometimes no, because I think we're coming back to one of the previous enablers. There is still a lack of capacity, and this is actually crucial. I think institutional embedding and capacity go in a certain sense hand in hand. So therefore, we have, so PEDR has helped produce one specific product for national disaster risk reduction strategies in collaboration with UNDRR, which is the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, which is a guide as to how to implement or how to work with nature-based solutions for your disaster risk reduction strategy. This document is currently open for public review until the 12th of January. So if any of you would like to go and take a look at it, and if you want to comment up until the 12th of January, please do. This has been a big work with 15 authors and several organizations and different experts, but we can always gather more input, so please do. So this is also this capacity building side of institutional embedding is, I think, really important. And the second thing that we have been working on at the moment is a massive open online course on nature-based solutions for disaster and climate resilience, which is open for everyone and also includes a section for policymakers, but it includes one for business, it includes a section for lots of different parts. And if you would like, I'd like to show you the promo video for this course. So if you could show the video.
The world is facing unprecedented challenges, and humanity is faced with a choice: continue on our unsustainable trajectory, or stop, listen, and learn from nature. The solutions to many of the problems we encounter are woven into the fabric of the natural world. Wetlands absorb floods, Vegetation binds soils on mountain slopes. Mangroves and sand dunes shield coastlines from storms. And everywhere, clean air, clean water and food provide the vital life support on which we depend. In this free, massive, open online course, you will learn about how nature-based solutions can improve our resilience to disasters and climate change impacts. You will also learn about what you can do to make a difference by getting involved, whether as a youth leader, practitioner, policymaker, business owner, or just a concerned citizen. By working together with nature rather than against nature, we may just be able to create a better future.
Thank you very much for showing the video. So you can sign up now if you like at pedder.org/MOOC. The course will start end of January, just to let you know. So thank you. So if that's all I would like to put for now, but I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
All right, thank you very much, Nathalie, for your interesting presentation. Of course, we cannot agree more that institutional embedding and capacity building go hand in hand. Also, if you would like to hear more about this MOOC, there's also information available on the EcoShape website, which will direct you further to the Pedder website. In light of time, I would like to continue with the next presentations. Nathalie, thank you very much. We'll see you back in the Q&A session later this webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks. So for the next presentation, I would like to introduce Egon Baldal. Egon Baldal works for Rijkswaterstaat. Welcome to the studio, Egon.
Thank you very much.
Egon, can you tell a little bit about your work with regards to institutional embedding and building with nature?
Yeah, let me first thank you for allowing me to be here and hold the story of Rijkswaterstaat. I work at Rijkswaterstaat. Rijkswaterstaat is the Office of Public Works of the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management of the Netherlands. And in my daily life, I'm an international project leader, especially on building with nature, nature-based solutions, and climate resilience in the Interreg North Sea region. What did we do on institutional embedding? Mainly in our international cooperation, we took all the different enablers that are being shown here today, and we addressed all of them. So including capacity building, including monitoring, including techniques, including stakeholder involvement, and the rest. And eventually it all ended up in policy briefs. So we made an EU level policy brief. We sent that to several departments of the EU, and we also made national policy briefs to make our governments aware of what we found in this mainly a research project. And if we now relate to the terrific story of Nathalie, thank you very much for that as well, where you say, yeah, capacity building is actually one of the key elements in institutional embedding. I couldn't agree with her more. Nature-based solutions are in essence the work of humans, human beings, with human being interests and effects. And I brought along some slides, and you will be able to see them. This is what we envisage. Here near land, we see a nature-based solution. We see people enjoying that, and that's where the multi-beneficial effects of nature-based solutions come along. This adds to the quality of life in a society. And with what the United Nations have defined, these United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and if we start looking at those, then we have this global set of indicators that we can use to show how these techniques work and where their effects lie in a universal language. And that is what we are aiming for in the long run, and that is how we can relate to the story of Nathalie, but also in our work on how to work towards embedding these techniques in a national government work.
Can you tell a little bit more about that? Later on in the webinar series, we're going to talk about business cases, about the more technical aspects, about maintenance, about adaptive management. Can you explain a little bit how these aspects aid to the uptake of nature-based solutions in the Netherlands?
Yes, I can. What I really like about this webinar series is the text, so set the stage. And that's what I think EcoShape, but a lot of other actors in the Netherlands have been doing in the past 12 years. I think that's all embedded in the book that you showed. Yeah. What I think is important there is that we have been working on these techniques for quite a long time, and we addressed the several aspects, and we need them all because each of those aspects represents a part of the societal impact of these nature-based solutions. So it is about technique, of course, and that's the real basic part. It has to work. The second part is we have to be able to monitor and follow that. Usually these nature-based solutions are solutions that are flexible, but also carry a bit of uncertainty in them, and how to deal with that in the long run. Now, if we want to implement such a thing and we can deal with that uncertainty, we also really would like to know what it costs. Because, yeah, well, I must say I'm still Dutch. I want to know what it costs. On the other hand, we also want to know what it yields, and that's where the multi-beneficiality comes around. And eventually we want to make sure that it's been taken up by a government that is aware of what these techniques are, how they work, and what different aspects they take along. Now, this entire spectrum is important for institutional embedding, and that's where I can only really agree with Nathalie. It's about capacity building, because we have to educate the current engineers and the current policymakers, but we also especially need to focus on future generations and build capacity there. But let's not repeat your last webinar.
Another question. What I see at the international level is that often nature-based solutions and building with nature, they are overarching ministries and overarching topics. They need to work together, and that's also about the institutional embedding. Can you talk a little about that, how that is dealt with in the Netherlands?
I think that is actually the challenge that we are facing now. In the Netherlands, we used to work a lot on natural flood management, so a real specific part of disaster risk reduction, but that's because, well, we live in a very low-lying country. So we have to deal with this. This is our traditional fight against water has now, with nature-based solution, turned into learning to live with water and allowing water and sediment to work for you. Now, with that part of the of acknowledging the importance of natural processes, you also enter the level of biodiversity or nature conservation in general. And that's what the following topic by Stéphanie will be about the Markerwadden, where we not just build something for natural flood management, but we also use these techniques nowadays to implement Nature 2000 measures in Nature 2000 areas under pressure. So we are already crossing the borders between the silos. We are crossing the borders between disciplines. But these are our very first steps. And I think it's very important to take those. Coming from engineering, going towards nature conservation and biodiversity, I think a following step will be to step into socioeconomic work. Like in well, European Green Deal, we say we leave no man behind, and it's really about that. There should be a fair playing field. People should be encouraged to join in and benefit from these nature-based solutions, and not have that been for part of the population, not all the adverse effects of nature-based solutions, if they are there, should land in one city or one part of the city or one societal group. That is an area where we really have to work. That's where we are not at the tipping point yet.
Okay, very interesting. That's also a topic that will be discussed later in the webinar series about multi-stakeholder approach and the business case. That's also one of our webinar series. One last question. I know you mentioned always that we should stop calling NBS pilots and should refer to as projects. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, it is of course a bit jumping the gun and pushing it. We have been doing a lot of pilots and a lot of large-scale pilots, as we can now see here. I believe this is the Galgenplaat in the Eastern Scheldt with. I think it's a Boskalis picture actually, or van Oort. No, it's Boskalis. Yeah. We have done a lot of pilots. We know how these techniques work. Now, and of course, there's always more to learn and more to endeavor. And we acknowledge so many different and new aspects of these techniques nowadays. But if we still call them pilots, then we say, guys, we don't know yet everything. And it's true, but it's also really a wrong type of framing. What we should say is, no, these are not pilots, these are experiences. We have been doing this for the past 12 years. We know what we're doing. And yes, we are improving this set of techniques further and further down the line. So no, we're not doing pilots. We are doing our work. And the next step is mainstreaming. We have set the stage already.
Thank you very much, Egon. And I think that's also a very good step to the next presentation, where we're going to look to an actual project, a full-scale project. We'll see you back in the Q&A session. Thank you very much for your story. Thanks. Lies, I would like to give the word to you.
Thank you. Yes, Egon, thank you for your presentation. Egon already referred to our last guest, actually, which is Stéphanie IJff. She's working at Deltares, and she will be our last guest talking about a local project, or brings us to the local scale. Stéphanie is an ecologist, and she is currently coordinating the program, the Knowledge and Innovation Program of the Marke Wadden. She is very much passionate about the governmental issues related to building with nature. And before I give Stéphanie the stage, we bring you to a small video that explains to you what the Marke Wadden is actually about. So this might pop up again in your screen.
Marke Wadden. In the past decades, fine sediment accumulated in the Marke Meer, disturbing the ecosystem and leading to declined bird and fish populations. Something needed to happen to restore this ecosystem. Then the building with nature solution was found. The surplus of sediment was used to create nature islands, islands that would improve water quality and create a new nature and recreational area. In 2018, the first islands were completed. 2 years later, Marke Wadden already attracts a wide variety of plants, birds and fish. Marke Wadden, a unique building with nature project and a source of inspiration for others.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I hope that this video have given you a first view on what the Marke Wadden look like. Well, I am part of the Marke Wadden project, not coordinating the whole knowledge program, but I coordinate with a co-coordinator the governance track. I'm trained as an ecologist, but during my work I found out that although you can, from an ecological perspective or technical perspective, make a perfect design for a solution, in the end it is also, or maybe especially, the decision making, the financing, local inhabitants' opinions, such processes, governance processes, that also largely determine what happens, so how the project is implemented in the end. So that's why I'm very interested in that aspect of building with nature. Well, something more about me. Building with nature is really a thread through my working career. I've been working on the Markerwadde for I think 3 years now, but work on more also coastal building with nature projects and in an international context. For me, it's about telling people and showing them what really the value of nature is. It's not only pretty, but as you could see in the previous presentations, we really need it for our coastal protection, for our food, fresh water, etc. In this picture, you see me giving a tour on the Markerwadde to a group of very diverse young professionals to tell them more about building with nature. Now the Markerwadde. Here you see some officials opening the Markerwadde. The Markerwadde is an example project of building with nature. It is not institutional embedding was not perfect for this project, but it is a very nice example of a project that is in between a pilot, where we can learn a lot from, but it's also a really big scale mainstream project. So it's a bit in between, and for that I thought it would be a nice example for this webinar. Before the project started, one could see it did not fit perfectly in the existing rules and regulations, but the actors that were involved decided to do it anyways. They trusted in this solution, and now that it is going on, they try to learn from it to make future projects go more smooth. What is especially striking about the Markerwadde, especially in my opinion, is the pace. So in quite a short time frame, it was grown from a first sketch to an implemented island where people can really go for a day. So in 2011, Natuurmonumenten, a nature organization in the Netherlands, initiated the idea of Markerwadde as a dream project, supported by a national lottery. A few years later, 2014, there was an official partnership with the government, because the idea was to build many islands. It's a big project. It's important to cooperate with the government, who of course has a lot of experience in this type of work. Already in 2015, the contractor could start and started building. And in 2018, people could really visit the island. For this presentation, I decided to focus on 3 reasons why this project was a success and why it could happen in a short period of time. And of course, in the frame of institutional embedding. Well, the first reason is that the project and the initial idea fitted so well with the ambitions for the whole region. In this satellite image of 2018, you can already see the Markerwadde on the top right-hand side. It's part of Lake Marke, which has another color than Lake IJssel, situated on the north. For people from abroad, on the bottom left, you see Amsterdam. So that's where you're situated here. Lake Marke has had a long history of many years or even decades of poor ecological quality. It was meant to become a polder, but after they decided to keep it as a lake, turbidity caused by sediments led to lower diversity of fish, birds, etc. The government has been investigating how to improve the ecology of this lake for many years. And one of the important aims of Markerwadde is to improve the biodiversity, not only on the islands itself, but by using silt, so clay from the lake bottom, and by providing some calmer areas, it would really improve the ecology. So that is reason 1. It fitted well in the ambitions for ecology, but also for economic developments. For example, Flevoland and Lelystad, the region and city on the right-hand side, are really looking to attract new inhabitants, and the Markerwadde could play a role in it. Then we go to the second reason why this project was such a success. I think that is because of the cooperation between many actors. Here you see some flags on the harbor where you enter the islands. The most important actors are Natuurmonumenten and the national government, and then executed by Rijkswaterstaat. So those two actors, they cooperated in really the project management. And because they could combine both their qualities, so Natuurmonumenten with their expertise on nature, nature development, but also in showing the developments to the world via media. They're very strong in that. And Rijkswaterstaat and the Ministry of Water Management, they had, of course, a big history of large infrastructure projects. And together they could execute this project. However, it did not yet fit perfectly in the rules and regulations of both organizations. So here you see that the institutional embedding was not yet perfect. They decided to go for it anyway because they really believed in the solution, and on the go they made tailor-made solutions. It's very important to then learn from these tailor-made solutions and see how you can embed them to make it go more smooth the next time. So for example, at Rijkswaterstaat, they are already changing some of the procedures of how to handle contracts based on their experience in Markerwadde, especially how to deal with adaptive management, another topic of the webinar series. And the third and last reason I would like to mention is that within this project of Markerwadde, one was able to combine diversity of financing sources. It started with a national lottery, Postcode Loterij, who gave a fund to Natuurmonumenten to work on their idea. Of course, there were some funds from two ministries, for water infrastructure or water management, but also for economic affairs because of the impulse the project would give to the region, and for more regional governments, so provinces. All these different funds were combined in one account, and what strikes me is that they decided to go build the first island even before the whole finances were secured. So they took a risk there, but it worked, and I like the idea that you already start to show off actually your project and to attract other people to show its benefits. Oh, maybe here, this is nice. Here you can see how the settlement is being built on the Markerwadde. So they, one of the ideas is that people can now also go there, for example, to sleep in non-corona times, of course. Concluding, so this was my story. In the end, I would like to conclude with the message that Markerwadde is all about pioneering. You can already see, that was named in a video, that many bird species, plant species start to colonize the islands as pioneers. But also for the actors involved, it was a form of pioneering, finding a new way to deal with this building with nature approach, but also to deal with the cooperation between public and private actors. That's also relatively new. And in the end, it became a very nice project that's open for visitors as well. And I would like to thank you here.
So thank you, Stéphanie, for your really nice presentation. Wait for me to handle the presentation now myself. Yes. Well, you can stay here because we are in our last part of this webinar, and I want to invite Egon to our table discussion, but I also want to virtually invite Nathalie to our discussion to do this Q&A part. And for this Q&A part, it's time to ask your questions also in the Q&A box. We already received a lot of questions, but it's also always interesting to have more questions of you. So please do so in the Q&A. Well, do we have Nathalie? Yes, I see her. Nice. My first question is to you, Stéphanie, because you mentioned 3 reasons why this project became successful. What can we do with those 3 lessons? How can we apply them in other projects where there maybe was not a funding from the lottery, or maybe not like this partnership already? What can you tell us about that?
Well, of course, thank you for the question. I think in this case of the Markerwadde, we are in close contact with, among others, Rijkswaterstaat and the governments in the Netherlands to go through all the lessons that we have and really make tailor-made guidelines for them. Next year is the last year of our research program that we're really busy with our governance research, and we'll put a lot of emphasis on really communicating the results of Markerwadde to actors not only in the Netherlands but also abroad. Of course, it's always a tailor-made approach, but I think if one is looking for some solutions, just have a look at some of our projects and the guidelines, and well, contact us. Yes, thank you.
Egon, a question for you. Stéphanie shared some lessons learned and let's say enablers of upscaling the method that has been applied at the Markerwadde. Can you say something about the governance perspective of this in adopting nature-based solutions at a national level?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, and probably the most difficult one as well, because this is what this specific webinar today is about. It is difficult because it's so pluriform. There are so many different types of nature-based solutions, and can I give one answer? No, I cannot, but what I can do is give some examples of how we go about this. Now, Stéphanie has already pointed out pretty clearly that we were really piloting Markerwadde. I just said that I wouldn't mention the word again, but this was piloting, and it was a new step into a new set of goals other than natural flood management. We also had a really big program called Room for the River, where we made sure that the areas around the rivers were resilient to really large discharges of the River Rhine specifically. But still, it is a tailor-made solution, as it always should be, for that program. But it's already a bit further developed than the more piloty Markerwadde. Another aspect of nature-based solutions is, for example, the Dutch coastline defense. And we do that with sand nourishments. And we use something like 12 million cubic meters of sand each year to keep the Netherlands safe from flooding from sea. The national policy on that is that it's actually very simple. It's one sentence, and it says, we do it in a soft way when we can, and we do it in a hard way when we have to. And it simply comprises that we use sand and we use nature-based solutions. We use natural sediment movement when possible. And if it's not possible, okay, so then we will take up the aspect of a very large levee or a sluice or whatever. So that's a part of Dutch policy where nature-based solutions are already embedded, and quite seriously so.
Thank you very much. Lisa, any questions from the audience?
Yes, actually, I received an interesting question, but it's for Egon. They addressed the second speaker, and that's you. So I first want to ask a question to Nathalie, because Nathalie, you can hear us, I guess?
Yes.
Yes, when you hear all these practical examples from the Netherlands, what is actually your takeaway for the global frameworks? What do you find interesting? What do you take?
Well, I mean, one thing that I think is always encouraging is when we see these being applied at different levels, because that also helps other countries. And indeed, I think that's something that has often been the first way of trying to, when we're talking about nature-based solutions, to embed them in different conventions, has often been a presentation of like, look what this country has done, or look what this part of the world is doing, and I think that can really help. And I think therefore that this is something, however, that sometimes does not always happen. And this is what I think should happen. So let's say in the Netherlands, whoever is responsible for doing these policies and implementing them in the Netherlands, they're not necessarily speaking to, let's say, the representative of the Netherlands in the international framework agreement. So I think more speaking across the different ministries and across the different policies, even at the national level, therefore also helps when you go up to the international level and start to try and embed more of this type of work within in frameworks, whether that be in future future global policies and agendas, because you need these. It's the country who makes the decisions. So you need, let's say, at the country level, people who know that this works to influence their own representatives, who then bring it up to the global level. So I think that's something that also needs to be taken into account.
Thank you, Nathalie. I guess that's a message for all of us to share, also part of our name, of course, to share the knowledge with other people, with representatives. Thank you. I want to ask this question to Egon. I already prepared you a little bit. This question, I hope I pronounce his name right, Guy Moret. And the question is, what are the risks if MBS is being misappropriate, addressed to validate development that is not ecological friendly in the end? What are the risks and how do you handle those risks?
So that is the risk if they are not, if a nature-based solution in itself has not a biodiversity asset in itself.
Yeah, I guess the term is used to validate the development, but in the end it's not ecological friendly.
Yeah, well, I think it really depends on what ecology you would look like, because if it is a nature-based solution, then it will also be in nature, using natural processes, and thus automatically embed the ecological system that is present there. Now, in the unfortunate case that this would not be the case, so that the local biodiversity would not be improved because of a nature-based solution, then you are talking about maybe a nature-based solution, but not a nature beneficial solution. And then it's all about your focus. So in the case of the idea of Stéphanie, if the outcome would be that nature does not benefit from this nature-based solution, well, that would be an outright disaster. And I'm very happy to say that it actually really works for biodiversity. I have actually never encountered an example of this. But I think that if the biodiversity aspect would be negatively affected by a nature-based solution in the long run, then that would be a part of the discussion for legislation. And especially in a Nature 2000 area where usually we work and we implement these measures, then that would be a topic to deal with. And traditional civil engineering always has this topic to deal with. So we are quite experienced in that. One of the reasons that we want to use the nature-based solutions is, apart from a lot of other ones, is that it is beneficial to the natural process in the specific area. So I think this is more of a theoretical issue than that it's a practical issue, really.
Thank you, Egon. I hope it will stay in theoretical issue, get practical. I have one last question. It's a short question. It's for Stéphanie. The question is from Maria Barcela Rial. And she asked, if there will be a Marco Wadden part 2, what would you have done differently regarding institutional embedding? What will you do differently?
Good one. Well, it is a very good question, so thank you. And actually, at the moment, already discussions are going on whether the Marco Wadden can become bigger and more islands can be built. What will be done in a different way is that, well, a stronger connection will be sought also with the actors from the Flevoland polder, where Marco Wadden are very close by. So in Marco Wadden has become part of the National Park New Land, or New Land in English, and that is a region of natural areas in this Flevo polder. And with that consortium, people are discussing if the Marco Wadden, if more islands will be built. So stronger connection with even more local partners. That's an improvement. And I think what is important is to wait a bit longer, so not start building new islands right away, but wait a bit until we have more research outcomes. At this moment, the monitoring and evaluation program is still running, so we already see on the islands themselves that the effects are very positive, above expectation regarding birds and plants, for example. But the effects on the waters and the ecology in the water around the island is still being investigated. So to make sure that the new islands and the design of the new islands is most effective, I would suggest wait a bit to make best use of all the knowledge we gained in the current Marco Wadden.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to end this discussion, although it's really interesting to continue with it. Well, you see, it's time to wrap this webinar. And we dived into this institutional embedding enabler today from a global to a local level. And I want to tip on some highlights of this webinar. Nathalie actually was a really nice presentation on the global level, which she mentions that it can take a lot of time and work to develop these kind of global frameworks. But if there's political will, there's passion, they know about that, the examples that show that it works, actually these institutional frameworks can come up more easier in the future. Well, Stéphanie told us about the Marco Wadden, which was all about pioneering, and showed us that it's really important to make it fit into regional ambitions. And also, she told us that these partnerships are really important. And of course, you need to combine different funds to actually implement this building of nature solution. In the end, we had Egon, and he told us that, with institutional embedding, it requires a vision on all societal aspects, which are also covered by our enablers. Actually, you can state that institutional embedding is the result or the product of all of these enablers. And you also told us, like, we are conscious at the global level, we have pilots at the local level, but there is really a momentum on the national level to make the choice, to equal the choice between building with nature or traditional engineering solution. So I guess those are really nice highlights of this webinar. And I want to thank all the partners that contributed to this webinar, and they will contribute also in the next webinars. And I want to give the word to Fokko for the last slide.
Thank you very much, Lies. Before I go to close this webinar, I would like to thank the speakers of today, Nathalie in Geneva, not sure if you're still there, Egon from Rijkswaterstaat, and Stéphanie from Deltares. Thank you very much for your contribution. Once the book is ready, this is a pre-launch edition. Once the book is ready in a couple of weeks, we'll make sure you get a copy sent home, so you can enjoy reading about building with nature over Christmas. This was the second webinar in a series of 6. The next one is on the 3rd of December. We will dive into the more technical aspects of building with nature and enabling building with nature, enabling mainstreaming of building with nature. We're going to talk about the technical concepts, and we're going to talk about the adaptive management, maintenance, and monitoring of nature-based solutions. Very important aspects, and also what you've heard today, you cannot see these enablers separately. They're all interlinked. We've heard these terms also in the presentation, so again, very relevant to tune in on the 3rd of December for the webinar series, which will be hosted by a new host. So we'll hand over the webinar to the next group. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have questions, you can still send them in, hopefully, and we will answer them in by email or in another way. Thank you very much.
Thank you.